Welcome to the Tudor Dixon podcast. There is a lot going on these days, whether we are watching from a global perspective or nationally. Things are just really a mess, but Congress is a special type of mess right now. Republicans can't unite on a speaker. Democrats have members demanding allegiance to Hamas. And one Congresswoman, well, she treats her staff so poorly. They actually rebelled and taped her and then leaked the audio so we could all experience the ugly side of being a staffer in Washington, D.C. And you thought carjackings were the worst part, but turns out it's just the working for certain Congress people. I have Rob Finnerty here, the host of Wake Up America on Newsmax, to break it all down. Rob, welcome back.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm good. It is good to see you too. Too bad we do have all of these crazy things happening. So I just want our audience to know we are recording this on Tuesday. And I say that because everything is happening so fast in the House, or maybe I should rephrase that and say so slow, but things are happening. It's just not moving forward. So potentially by the time you hear this on Wednesday, maybe there's a speaker. I'm not holding my breath though. What do you think, Rob?
I think we have a speaker before the end of the day today.
You do?
And it seems like I do. I said that on the air this morning. So that no one had any idea this was going to take 20 days for the House to figure this out. I don't think any of the 8 rebels, so-called rebels, thought this was going to take this long. Right now, it's between, I think, Mike Johnson of Louisiana and then Tom Emmer, who's the majority whip in the House. And I think, although I would prefer personally Mike Johnson, I think Tom Emmer's going to be the guy ultimately that pulls this off. And it's too bad because if that was going to be the case, they probably could have done that 20 days ago. They went through Steve Scalise. They went through Jim Jordan. Mike Johnson is not somebody that's got any issues with Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump's the nominee, if he becomes president in 2024, I don't know how well Emmer and he will work together, but it seems like that's the way this is trending right now.
Yes, he is now. He's been voted through on the secret ballot. They did a roll call vote, and they have more people voting against him than Jim Jordan had. So how do you think they get there? Because we have these people that I think just continue to say, oh yeah, I'm going to play by the rules of the party, and then they don't. And I think the frustrating part for people who understand how government works is that you can break it. I mean, this is a system that you can break. It is the most effective and the most well-functioning government in the entire world. It benefits the people better than anyone else. But we don't want to be the first generation to break it, do we?
No, and I think it's important. I was not a fan initially of getting rid of Kevin McCarthy just because I think there's a lot on the line right now. And this happened. This was before October 7th. So this happened before everything in Israel.
Right.
2.5 weeks ago. And at that time, I thought to myself, this is probably not the best thing for Republicans heading into an election year. Now we're almost a year to the day away from Election Day. Kevin McCarthy agreed to this rule. So everybody that gives the 8 rebels, Tim Burchett, Matt Gaetz, Nancy Mace, so on and so forth, everyone that gives them a hard time, look, they just paired up with 202 Democrats. And Kevin McCarthy, I'm sorry, but we went through that 5-day, I think it was 15 rounds back in January, that slugfest to get him the gavel in the first place. His hold on the speakership was tenuous at best. And he made a bad deal. And the chickens came home to roost. And here we are 9 months later without a speaker. So I wasn't a fan, but now looking at this process unfold, I don't think anyone thought it was going to take 3 weeks. I think the House has hit sort of a fulcrum point, and they all realize that, all right, on November 17th, the government could shut down. Joe Biden wants to spend $105 billion in a massive too big to fail package that includes, I think, Taiwan, the border, Israel, Tudor Dixon's roof repairs, and also another $60 billion for Ukraine. So they know they have to address that. So I really, honestly, I think by the time everyone listens to this Wednesday, we have a Speaker of the House.
I hope so. I was in the same boat as you with Kevin McCarthy. And I think a lot of people, I mean, especially I know a lot of folks in the grassroots movement that are on Matt Gaetz' side. They wanted Kevin McCarthy out. And I understand that there's that feeling that you needed somebody that was speaking for the voice of the people. And I think that there needs to be a little discussion. And we really don't ever get into this on the news because there's not enough time to get into this on the news. But you have 435 members of Congress, and you have more than half of those are Republicans. Not every Republican comes from a strong red district. And the fact of the matter is that whether you are from that district or not, you have to be respectful of your colleagues because you want them back in the House. I mean, we want more Republicans than Democrats. And I know that sometimes people go, well, that's not everything I want. But this system of government is compromised. And we have to make sure we're looking out for all of us and getting back in because you only have power in the majority. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and I think Republicans have a great chance of holding on to the majority in 2024. I think this is a blip on the radar. Tragically, what happened in Israel gave Republicans cover, and this hasn't been a front page story. I saw this weekend, all of a sudden, CNN, MSNBC, they were back to criticizing Republicans for not having a speaker in place. But I think for about 2 weeks, Republicans kind of had cover. Again, unfortunately, given what we saw play out in Israel. And no one wants to see this happen. But we've got 18 Republicans serving in districts that Biden won. But there's also a slew of Democrats that are serving in districts that Donald Trump won in not only in 2020, but also in 2016. So that goes both ways. And I think given everything, Joe Biden's approval rating, the numbers, CNBC had a poll last Thursday, he's at 38%. And Tudor, we've talked about this before, but 38%, that's basically as low as you can go if you're a major party nominee or candidate because you've got a baked in base. Donald Trump's got the same thing right now. He's the leading candidate for the Republican nomination. Until that changes, that 35 to 40% is his for the taking. And it's the same thing with Joe Biden at 38%.
Yeah, it's still a weird election when you have all of the things that you have going on with the Bidens behind the scene, with Donald Trump behind the scenes. I mean, we're seeing him in these hearings. We're seeing people plead guilty in Georgia to election interference. This is going to be a very messy election. But I think that honestly, October 7th, what happened in Israel is going to be very interesting in how that plays out over the next year. Obviously, we're going to be watching what's going on in the Middle East and how involved we're going to get. We hear Antony Blinken coming out just in the press conference, which will be yesterday now. That press conference, that was the hardest we've heard them talk about Iran yet. He came out and he said, look, we don't want a war, but if you press us, if you go after Israel, we will come after you. Those are pretty strong words. I believe that's the strongest we've heard the Biden administration. And I think it's going to have to be from someone other than Joe Biden because Joe Biden is so confused on the world stage. Every time he goes out, I mean, they ask him about a ceasefire and he kind of yells as he's walking out of the room, yeah, I'd like one. Oh no, wait a minute. I only want one if we get the hostages back. It's like, this is not the message. But the clear message from Antony Blinken was, if you attack Israel, we go after you. What are your thoughts on that?
So first of all, about the being worried about Joe Biden, that's such a good point. And I think now, so this is day 17 since October 17th. I think people are finally now starting to process what happened. And then on the other side of that, looking at us, we are evacuating embassies across the Middle East. Why not reinforce those embassies? What message does that send? Not only do we have a carrier fleet ×2 in the Eastern Mediterranean, we're sending one into the Persian Gulf. China is doing the exact same thing. That shouldn't make anybody comfortable. I think that leaves too much room for some miscalculation that could lead us into World War II. And we've been sleepwalking World War III, and we've been sleepwalking into World War III since Joe Biden took office in January 2021. To your point, though, I'm glad we're finally I don't think Joe Biden is capable of handling what's going on, not only in Ukraine, but in the Middle East. What if he gets a phone call, like the World War III phone call that comes at 3 o'clock in the morning? Is he capable of addressing that situation if that were to happen? I hope it doesn't. Of course, we all hope it doesn't. But is he the guy you want taking that call and making? I'm sure the answer is no. And look, elections have consequences, but Democrats, even their worst nightmares, I don't think that they envisioned where we are right now taking place. Tudor, so Joe Biden takes office. 7 months later, Kabul falls. 8 months after that, Russia invades Ukraine. 2.5 years later, there's a war in Israel. China has got really consequential elections in January. Then after that, I think Taiwan could fall next. Do you think that China's going to sit around and wait for a Republican to take over in the Oval Office? No way. They're going to do it while Joe Biden is still in the Oval Office because they know He's vulnerable. They know that now is the time to take advantage of a weak American president.
Absolutely. They were waiting for this. I totally agree with you. And honestly, you talk about whether he's ready for that phone call. I was nervous when he got on that plane to go to Israel because in my mind, I thought, if the Secret Service have to push him down and protect him, aren't you worried about him being too frail to even do that
Right.
too? I mean, this guy, you can't get him to run. He can't get out of the way in time. There is no youth to him. And I'm not saying that age has to be a factor, but at some point we just have to be realistic that this is not somebody who can go with the flow in times like this. But then, I mean, I have to say, on the flip side of that, we are looking at a Republican candidate that is age-wise nearly the same age. And so I know that people are like, wow, it's a totally different situation. But I think that there are some people who are saying, do we need someone young in office right now as we're going into what looks like it could tip off World War III? And we've seen a lot of generals come out and say this, we're not close to that yet. Don't talk about this. And I feel confident that there is an amount of pause to take on that comment right now, because I do think that we have to say, well, wait a minute, we're just at the beginning of this. Let's not freak everybody out. But when you step back and you see what's happening on American soil, when I talked about the congressmen and women who are out there saying stand with Palestine, which I really say, if you are out there saying that right now, you really mean stand with Hamas, because Israel didn't come out and attack the Palestinians. They were trying to live with the Palestinians. They have always been trying to broker peace. They have the Iron Dome. That was obviously, they breached the Iron Dome. Right. They went in and they committed horrific atrocities. So where do we stand if we come out right now and talk about World War III, while we have a nation so divided on this, and you actually have, I think it was 18 congressmen who signed this letter saying we need to stand with Palestine. Where are we? What happens on our soil?
18, by the way, is that the number?
That was what I heard yesterday.
I mean,
that's what AOC said. We'll see.
I
don't know.
Disturbing. I mean, well, she's not one of the brilliant minds, but I wouldn't be surprised. By the way, so I'm writing an op-ed right now for Newsmax.com, and it's about that issue. For the last couple of years, I've said, fine, age, it's not a chronological thing. Joe Biden's 80, you're right. Trump's 77. I actually think it is a chronological thing. My dad is 80. And we've had this conversation. My dad's got all his marbles, all right? But I don't even like my dad watching my kids, okay? Not that he's not totally capable, but I've got a 7 and a 4-year-old, and they're maniacs. But I wouldn't. Right. Would you trust Joe Biden to deliver the mail? No, you wouldn't. You would not.
Well, he's on the beach in the middle of this, and we're all just supposed to be like, how cute. They're holding hands. I'm like, screw you. Get back to the White House, dude.
I think it's yes, I think it's time for younger male or female to be in the Oval Office. I truly do believe that. And I think the rest of the world, what you're seeing right now, I mean, this is certainly hasn't happened in our lifetimes. Didn't happen even in Israel in 2014 with the last major conflict there. And what was the second thing we were talking about? I was on a roll there. What was it? It's late for me, Tudor.
The standing with Palestine.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful?
Which I say is standing with Hamas. Let's be clear.
So the issue with that, and you mentioned the word ceasefire earlier. How many times have you heard ceasefire since October 7th? Like countless, right? Every day on the news, ceasefire,
yes.
ceasefire.
Yes.
How many times have you heard ceasefire as it relates to Ukraine?
Right. That's interesting.
Right? Or peace talks or negotiated peace or any variation of ceasefire, 21 months and counting. The New York Times had the numbers, hundreds of thousands dead and injured on both sides. The carnage there, I mean, it is as bad, on the same level as what we've seen in Israel. It's unbelievable how many people have died or have been wounded on the battlefield or innocent civilians in Ukraine, and we never hear ceasefire. What's that all about? What, $60 billion? We finally looked into it. All right. So since the late 1940s, the U.S. has given Israel something like $150 billion total. We've almost given that to Ukraine in 21 months. And if we do give them this $60 billion as a part of that $105 billion spending package that Joe Biden's calling for, we will have surpassed what we've given Israel in 80 years. which is pretty unbelievable.
That is
Yeah.
crazy. And, we had some folks a few weekends ago, we were at an event in Indiana, and these folks said, tell us why you think that Ukraine is any different than Israel. And I was there with Buck Sexton. Obviously, he is much more qualified to talk on this subject than I am, but we both kind of made the same point. In Ukraine, you have Putin, who is invading Ukraine because he wants that land. The difference is he actually wants the Ukrainians to live there and be a part of Russia, right? He wants them to pledge allegiance to him, but he wants them to live. In Israel, the Palestinians, or Hamas, they want to go in and they want to kill the Jews. This is about killing Jews. And anybody who says that that's not what this is, that is 100% what this is. And when you hear people say from the river to the sea, what does that mean? It means wipe out the Jewish people. I mean, and the fact that we have young people on college campuses saying this, and they learn it from professors. And you've got professors who are Jewish who are out there on the front lawn of their universities begging people not to do this. And you've got these Hamas sympathizers who are also professors who are out there telling people they're oppressors. And this, the interesting part about that is it really started with the DEI movement in K through 12, because they started with this idea of oppression, and you can't have these colonizers in your taking over different territories. And I mean, it's all a lie when it comes to Israel.
Yeah. On Monday morning, the Israeli military gave select members of the media access to something like 43 minutes of unedited footage from what we saw play out on October the 7th. And our correspondent was in the room and came on with us at 6:30 in the morning. They're 7 hours ahead of us. So it was, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, almost there. And he started crying. And his name's Daniel Cohen. And I've known him for a few years now. He's always, the consummate professional. He's a father of three. And he started crying on the air, and a hit that was scheduled to last 2 minutes lasted for almost 10. And it was difficult to get through what he saw. He had a tough time describing, Tudor, what he saw, even just trying to sanitize it for our audience at home. It was that bad. This is not, you're right. Vladimir Putin wants the Donbass region, and he wants access to the Black Sea. He probably wants all of Ukraine, but he does want the people that are there now to continue living there and be incorporated into Russia. What we saw October 7th, and what we've seen as long as we've had this two-state not solution, is they want the complete eradication of the Jewish people. And what we're seeing on college campuses, that's not the stuff that people were protesting when I went to college. And it wasn't that long ago.
I know. Mine was a little longer, but nobody did
No,
that.
it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
It was not, but it wasn't like this. And I don't remember professors trying to put their ideology on us. I mean, it was really about learning. I actually, unless I was completely naive to it, I just don't remember it happening. But I think it's so prevalent. A new poll just came out and showed that they were asking if people felt that this Hamas attack, so the 10/7 attack, was justified. And people in the age range of 55 to 64, 89% of them said no, it was not justified. But if you go to 18 to 24, only 51% said it's not justified. So almost half thought that it was okay to go in and do the things you said. Sanitize, that he came on your show, your correspondent Mr. Cohen came on your show, and he had to sanitize it for TV because the attack was so horrific that even telling what he saw is not allowed on network TV. So imagine that these young adults are out there, half of them saying, yeah, I think it was justified. How could you feel that way?
Yeah, it's shocking. And we saw, I don't know if you saw this from the New York Times. So a week ago, it was last Wednesday, we heard this, it was overnight. So we came into the newsroom, we had a meeting before the show, and we knew we had to be cautious about this hospital attack in Gaza. And I just said, look, it's total BS. CNN, the New York Times, MSNBC, they were already on the air, their early, whatever program they call that. And the message was, Hamas told us, basically, Hamas, all right, that would be like after 9/11, Al-Qaeda told us X, okay? Hamas told us this came from Israel. This was a rocket that was targeted toward this hospital. They were going for a Hamas military location, but instead they missed a hospital, and that 500 died. The New York Times apologized yesterday. Did you see this apology, by the way? It's like a 15.
No, I actually did
It's the
not
New
see
York
this.
Times. They tried to apologize. It's like 15 paragraphs. They never actually say we're sorry we got it wrong. We at 6:30 a.m. right on the news went, listen, no, we believe this is Hamas. We don't have it verified. We're going to work all day to get that verified. But I have a tough time thinking that this was Israel. The New York Times apologized, and at the very end they said, they wouldn't let us go in and actually inspect the hospital site itself. So there's no way to completely verify and rule out that this was a rocket from Israel. So even in their apology, they still left the door open to maybe this being Israel and not Hamas, which is just, it is so mind-blowing, and it's really, really sad that this is where we are less than 3 weeks after the most tragic terrorist attack we've seen in Israel in a long time, actually ever.
I mean, if you think about I was thinking about this morning, I don't know why, but I was thinking, gosh, if we had social media after 9/11, imagine the number of people who would come out and say, this was the American government that did this, and this was all a conspiracy, and all of those people that would have come out, and you would have had this people torn in half going, instead of the coming together that we had after 9/11, you would have seen this. And I look at this and my advice to people is don't listen to any of the influencers out there. I mean, and I include myself in that. I'm not an expert in war. I have my opinion on certainly what I think that we need to, we don't support terrorism. We need to support Israel. They are one of our allies. They are a key ally in that region. And I think that that's something that people don't understand. You have to have someone on your side in that region of the world. But we have all of these social media influencers that are going out, and they are, Monday morning quarterbacking everything that happens in this war. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you are 25 and you've been in front of a podcast mic your whole life. What do you know about a war? What? Take your information from generals, from people who have lived this. When they come out and they say, don't immediately think that we're going into World War III, but we have to be aware. I mean, like I said, what Blinken said today, this is the Secretary of State coming out and for the first time saying, Iran, if you do this, we're coming for you. That's serious.
Yeah,
now we're
I wish
serious.
it was the president, though.
Of course, yes. He has not said anything about Iran.
He hasn't said anything. I think he's mentioned, Iran 4 times in the last 3 months, even in passing. I don't know why we continue to try to appease Iran. It makes no sense to me. Re-entry into the Iran nuclear deal makes no sense to me. I don't like saying, hey, what if Trump were president? Would this be happening like this? But do you think that Trump, if he were still in office, would use maybe a little bit stronger language to condemn Iran? The Wall Street Journal, the attack happened Saturday, 10/7. On Monday, the Wall Street Journal basically had a report concluding that Iran had a hand in the planning and approval of this terrorist attack. You're right. 10/7 is Israel's 9/11. And just like we've got Holocaust deniers now, I mean, there's a movie I saw not long ago. It's called Denial. Came out in like 2016, Rachel Weisz. And it's based on a true story of a group of Holocaust deniers. It's an excellent movie, but there are already, again, less than 3 weeks removed from this tragic, terrible terrorist attack in Israel. There are already 10/7 deniers out there. And a lot of them are social media influencers and these idiots that people listen to, and then they propagate whatever they're hearing from people who have no idea what they're talking about. And Tudor, I'm not a military expert in any way, shape, or form, but I like to think I'm somebody that's fairly read in, and to think that this is anything outside of what America experienced on 9/11 is it's shameful if you think anything outside of that.
Well, and you're held to a higher standard. I mean, you're out there, you're not trying to get clicks. You want to get people information. There is a different goal with people in the position of being a journalist, someone who's delivering information. It has to be accurate. This idea that you have so many, it's funny because I think a lot of times before this happened, many of us have kind of thought, back to some of these other wars in the past, Vietnam and World War II, certainly. What would it have been like had social media been around? I mean, Vietnam would have been a nightmare for all those guys. It was already a nightmare when they came back and people were denying that they should have gone and treating them horribly. But then you think about World War II, and honestly, I always thought if the pictures were coming out, if people could have seen the concentration camps, everybody would have been outraged. It would have ended faster. And now I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And I also, this is probably just, I think this probably happens every generation. So 9/11, we didn't have social media, right? So the towers go down, 9/11 happens, and there are people like Pat Tillman who immediately go and enlist. But outside of people like that, it wasn't like,
Mm.
the biggest sports stars in the country were going to fight, for America after that, and people in Hollywood. World War II, and I just think, again, my grandparents both fought in the Second World War, both my grandfathers. And my grandfather, I'm from Boston, and he was like, yeah, it was amazing. He's like, Pearl Harbor happens, and Ted Williams, the best baseball player at the time, enlists a couple days after Pearl Harbor. So does Joe DiMaggio. So does Joe's brother Dom. And then Bob Feller, this pitcher, I think for the Indians, he had this great quote. He was like, they were like, why'd you gave up this lucrative pitching career. You were the best pitcher in baseball. And his quote was, I thought it was time to get busy fighting. And they all made it back. But it gives me chills because I feel like
Me
it's
too.
changed. That was an era of the greatest generation of American heroes.
Right. Absolutely. And it has changed. And I see these Harvard kids, and I talked about this last week, the Harvard kids. I don't feel bad for those Harvard kids that signed this because they did everything they could to get into Harvard. They were really careful to get into Harvard, and they knew what this message is. This is going to be, like I said, as we go, I want to switch gears a little bit to the presidential election because I do think that this is going to play into that. And I do think that people are going to be watching Trump carefully because I think you're right. He would have been tougher. But I think that the Donald Trump who was elected in 2016, had he been in office for 8 years, he would have continued to be that guy. And he's changed a little bit. And I wonder how this version of Donald Trump will handle this out on the world stage with all of the noise behind him. We're seeing these legal cases in Georgia. We've just got Jenna Ellis now. She pleads guilty. You've got Sidney Powell pleading guilty. All of these people pleading guilty. What does that look like for Trump on the campaign trail?
And I think part of the reason that Trump was so successful, at least when it comes to foreign policy, when he was in office, is because, and we've all heard this, people like Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, the Shah in Iran, there wasn't a dossier on Donald Trump. He was an unknown quantity because he'd never held elected office. He'd never even been dog catcher. I mean, he was unknown outside of, writing books and being a celebrity. So that variable, I think, made a lot of our adversaries uncomfortable. Whereas Joe Biden, the guy was in the Senate for 35 plus years. He was vice president for 8 years. Everyone knows Joe Biden's tendencies, his peccadillos, and what he's likely to do in a given situation. And that has not served us well. I'm not convinced that, let's say Trump does get reelected, I'm not convinced that everything is just, well, this didn't happen when he was in office 4 years ago. It's not going to happen now. I think that our adversaries know a lot more about Donald Trump. And I'm not sure, and no one talks about this, but I'm not certain that serves Donald Trump well if he actually does get elected again. Back to your question about everything happening legally. We have attorneys and some very, very bright people on every week. Alan Dershowitz, Jordan Sekulow, Andrew Napolitano comes on all the time just to sort of fill in the blanks with what's going on in each one of these cases. And it's really tough for people to follow the bouncing ball. This is not good for Donald Trump. I think what happened in Israel, Tudor, has taken him out of he hasn't won a news cycle, by my count, in more than 3 weeks. Normally, Trump is the news cycle. He hasn't won a news cycle in more than 3 weeks. And that opens the door, not a lot, but ever so slightly, to people like Nikki Haley and even Ron DeSantis, whose campaign has been an abject disaster. I think he will learn from it and run again down the road. We can talk about that in 2028, 2032, whenever. But the door is open for people like Nikki Haley right now.
Yeah, I agree. Right now, I think what you said there was really interesting. I just want to backtrack a little bit to people knowing who Donald Trump is now, because I think that You make a really interesting point that I haven't heard anybody talk about. And that is, you're right. No one knew him, but now they know what buttons to push. And he does have buttons to push. And we can see when people on nationally are pushing his buttons now, and he's getting frustrated. And I think that some of that also goes to the fact that, I mean, he's been doing this a long time. He's been attacked for a long time. He's under a lot of pressure. And I know everybody says, oh, he doesn't crack, that pressure doesn't bother him. At a certain point, it has to get to you. And that, I think you're right. That is the lane for a Nikki Haley to come in, especially at a time like this, because not only is she someone who's saying, hey, I want to make sure our border is secure because we don't know who's coming across the border. And we should not accept the amount of deaths that we have from fentanyl every year. I think that's been unique for her. I think everybody has been kind of railing on the border, but she's come at it from a perspective of, we're losing more people than we lose in a war. And that's a big deal. And instead of just closing the border, we need to stop China from making fentanyl. That has played well with people. I think she also has that in with women that we haven't had in a very long time in the Republican Party.
I honestly think that Trump's not going to debate in early November. That'll be the third debate in Miami, Florida. It's on NBC, I believe. That's smart for Donald Trump because he is unlike any nomination process we've seen, maybe going back to the 60s. He can run out the clock. We're going to be voting in Iowa in less than 3 months, January 15th. A couple of weeks after that, it's New Hampshire. And then they go like dominoes. It's South Carolina. And then early March is Super Tuesday. If Trump wins in New Hampshire and Iowa, forget it. That's the ball game. And if he doesn't go on the debate stage, people like Chris Christie, who's not very popular, certainly with the MAGA crowd, they don't stand a chance, and it'll be over before spring.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, there were a lot of people saying yesterday that he didn't have a big enough crowd in New Hampshire, that New Hampshire is iffy. I don't know. I mean, he seems to consistently bring in the big numbers, but I also think you never know with these polls these days. You never know. We could go into these primaries and we could be completely shocked. I think it'll be interesting. I'd love to have you back when it happens. Then we can chat about that. But I am so grateful you came on today. Thank you, Rob.
Tudor, so good being with you. Thanks for having me.
It's always fun. Rob Finnerty, make sure you're always checking him out in the morning on Newsmax. And thank you so much for joining us on the Tudor Dixon podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there or head over to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us the next time on the Tudor Dixon podcast. Have a blessed day.